no one wants to be a game writer. Absolutely no one goes to school or dreams or whatever to become a game writer. I have said many times over the latest years that I have zero trust in game writers. And I think it particularly comes from that I actually fired the game writer that worked on Horizon Zero Dawn. Yes, literally. We hired this person after they worked on Zero Dawn, and then I fired them, and I just wrote the game myself instead. I want to say that, of course, some games have really good storylines, some really amazing storylines. But can you tell me a game that actually had a person that wanted to be a game writer writing the game? Or rather, was it someone like Yasumi Matsuno that studied to become a foreign policy guy? Then he wrote the story for Ogre Back, the Ted's Ogre and so on, right? It actually makes a lot of sense. Think about it. The guy studied basically politics, right? Like war politics, and all his games are very focused on like war affairs. I mean, honestly, I don't think I've ever liked a video game storyline where the person writing the main storyline actually is a writer. More or less, you're always the game designer, sometimes the producer, sometimes the programmers, sometimes even the artist, right? But it's never a person who's like, oh, I want to be a game writer. But again, I'm not saying that no good game has good storylines. Some of them are amazing. I'm just saying that, just like me, honestly, I am a better writer for a game than a writer. But again, just iterate, I'm not saying that good games can't have good storylines. I'm just saying that the good writers are always people that understands the game focus first and foremost, and then they also add the storyline. So this video is a continuation, I feel, in the comment section we had in my previous game video, right? Talking about like why do Vogue game kinda are bad? Well, they don't actually like video games, right? And the writers are honestly even worse, right? So I can make many videos about this, and I will, guys, if you press the like button. No, but seriously, right? Give, let's say, 100 likes, and I make a video particularly about that firing of the Zero Dawn dev writer. So I don't want to make a video about that as a full topic, but it's sensitive, but I will make it. But honestly, right, I said it many times before, but basically, a massive issue for GSP game, like with the Vogue, right, is that they don't even like video games, right? And then when you look at specific roles in the industry, the writer, it is the worst role, okay? No one wants to be a writer. Seriously, no one wants to be a writer, right? Like, there's always something that does, and it's happening afterwards. No one cares about the writing, and I'll explain this video here why then, right? And you can extrapolate it to other roles as well. Like, no one really wants to be the localized. I said it many times, right? I said it many times. The main reason why we see so much, censorship in both video game and anime and so on, right, is because no one actually wants to be the person doing it, even QA, So in this video, I have a couple of points I want to go over, 6 in total, I suppose. But I will say that one of the main points, it's definitely true, like I said, right, for all of the similar roles. Like, well, no one wants to be that role, and it's also like, how expendable are you, so on, right? So anyway, let's go into the video, and let's start then again that no one actually wants to be the writer. Right? So he was my biggest, as a kid, I idolized Yasumi Matsuno, so I say that, right? Of course, I'm a huge fan of Yuriken Overload, obviously like a spirit sequel to Ogre Battle, right? I got this, even the collector edition, I got it in Triangle Strategy and so on. So I love these games. I haven't beaten the game yet. I'm almost beating it now. I'm making a video about it soon. So it'll be a very long review. But I love these precious games, right? Ogre Battles, Ogre FF12, Variant Story and so on. And I want to say again, just like iterated on my last video, that this is also what I feel, honestly, not to be like, oh, I'm the best, but seriously, this is how a game designer should be, right? When other kids were idolizing soccer players or, Beckham or whatever, right? Or they liked video games, or they were like, oh, I'm into this game, like Final Fantasy. They were into the game, perhaps, right? I was like, I like this game designer. I was a 10-year-old being like, my favorite designer is this guy. Like, honestly, it honestly feels very weird, right? I personally, honestly, see myself something a bit of a Quentin Tarantino, he's less famous, but kind of, right? Because when I see him in interviews, he knows every director, every actor. He actually knows who's every person that was behind every movie he liked as a kid, right? I was the same with games. I actually cared who was that person deciding someone, and I don't feel that, I don't feel that most people getting into the industry actually care at all. They don't know who designs sell. They don't even know who likes, it's so rare, right? But anyway, hype rant over. My main reason why I begin Yasumi Matsuno to begin with is like I said earlier, right? For number one then, no one wants to be a writer. He wrote some of the best games ever made, I would argue for, right? Opposite Ogre Battle is his big hit, right? The first big hit, which again, the Unicorn Overlord next to me here is mechanically based on it. Very similar game mechanics, but storyline of course is different, but like mechanically based, very similar. And then he made Text Ogre, which of course is like the game, right? That I wouldn't say is it the first game of that kind of isometric board game, right? But basically it is the first real big one, right? And then he made FFT and so on. So that kind of created the genre by itself. Now Fire Emblem was already released before that is true. But Fire Emblem doesn't have the same like base gameplay where they have like the chessboard up heights and so on. So Fire Emblem is quite different, I would say, than Text Ogre. Obviously they're very similar, but they're also quite different, right? Anyway, I digress. When he made these games, right, and I think it's a great example of this thing, he's a foreign policy guy, right? He didn't study game writing. He didn't even study games. He loved video games, but didn't even study games. He studied, politics, studied warfare, he studied diplomacy, right? And his games are, his idolized games, FF12 as well, are very, very focused, right, on actual, like, the struggle between countries and betrayal, lawful good, lawful evil, and, your best friend betrays you, the princess betrays, it's that stuff. He's very focused on, historical stuff, right? So he's obviously a big fan of, if you see the interview, he likes, historical stuff, Tokugawa period, this and that, and Nobunaga, Oda, and three Romans, whatever. He likes that stuff, right? He likes that stuff, and it's very, very clear, I don't know, the League Wars or whatever in Europe, he likes the shit, right? And that's very, very clear. And then he writes around that. That's, to me, is a game writer, an actual game writer. When you hire these people as a game writers, they're always terrible, right? They're straight up terrible, right? Because, of course, if you ignore them, a person like Yasumi Matsuno, and we go to something like Serious in the Dawn, where I mentioned, he did actually fire the person that had worked in this game, yeah. Used to put out again that this person I fired, there was a game afterwards. So they had worked on Horizon Dawn, the first version, and then we hired them to write our game, and I just fired them. Because it was so bad to help, so I was like, get out, there's a door! And it could be on video. But basically, this person, and honestly, my full experience in the game industry, with anyone that's ever been a writer, and not actually, like a game designer writes, are always just, they're insanely terrible. Because they don't care about the game, right? Game writers is like the worst job to have in the industry for these two main reasons. So the first reason, again, no one wants to be a writer. They want to be a writer on books, first and foremost. Maybe some philosophy, right? Maybe they want to make movies, maybe TV shows. You know what I mean? It goes down the list, right? So no one actually wants to be a game writer. Game writer is like the bottom of the list, right? And I said the same thing in my Netflix review, right? Latest Netflix Castlevania review, where I was like, what is wrong with this show? It's so clear that the writers on Castlevania Nocturne, right, they hate Castlevania. Because, of course, in this list, right, the absolute bottom is probably to be like, oh, I'm a video game, TV show, Netflix writer. That's like the absolute bottom that no one went to school to become, right? You know what I mean? So, but the video games are obviously very, very far down the list, right? So that already is like, they don't want to write for this thing. They don't like video games, they don't want to work on there, right? That's the main reason you don't want to hire them, because they're basically bad writers. They couldn't get a job right in the actual writing they want to do. Right? The only person I can think of that is a writer that also wrote video games, I suppose, right, is Elden Ring, which, yeah, that guy's pretty famous, right? But he kind of wrote the lore around it. That's the only thing in my head I think of. Every other time I hear about them having a writer for a game, it is absolute shit, right? There are some Japanese person you can say kind of dabble, but I think in Japan's culture, it's also quite different, because you might say I'm going for the Western here mostly. That is true, but things that with Japanese, what they like to pay and so on, they kind of, they also write like light novels, or they kind of write these like, isekai that's based on video games, kind of ish, and then they might write a video game. They're very much moving around that field anyway. Most of them, so a lot of these isekai writers get hired to write games, right? But they're basically writing games anyway as a book form. So they're so borderline on that already. So I don't count those guys. They're basically already game design writers to begin with. But no, there's like no writer ever is basically just a writer because they don't want to be that, right? They don't want to work there. That's the first point. It's a very, very clear point. Now, number two, and the reason I fired this person, right, is because the writer is the most expendable person in the whole game industry, okay? Less than the QA, less than the is the game writer, and narrative writer. They're absolute bottom, right? They really are, because a monkey can write on the keyboard, right? but I have to actually care who has a coder, or a scripter, or a game balancer, or whatever, right? It takes at least some skills. Now, of course, I'm not saying that, obviously, there's a huge difference between bad and good writers. Of course, it's night and day. But from an actual, it's like doing something skill, no, writing is a thing. It is, right? I mean, writing, as it is, writing something mid, right? Something that's okay for a video game or even for a movie, it's incredibly easy. Yeah, write something that's like a mid is like 1 out of 10 skill, right? Write something that's really good, that's 10 out of 10 skill. But write something that's like bearable for a video game is super, super easy, right? However, I can't have a mid coder. I can't have a mid coder doing the network coding and then it kinda not really works, but then the game doesn't work, you know what I mean? Like, I can't have that, you know, I can't have that. So the reason, it's a very short version of my file version then, before we hired and worked on Sales and Lawn, but I had to keep asking them to make the storyline more adjacent or more into the actual body of the game. So behind me here is the image of Front Mission 3. In Front Mission 3, you can play both pro USA and against USA basically in the storyline. And that means that the game has, like I said, 40 different stages, where 20 of them take place on both sides. Ergo, it's 60 different stages, right, that are unique, so to speak, because you actually have 20 overlapping. So this photos here, you attack it and you defend it, right, depending on your USA or anti-USA, right? That's what I wanted in my game too, because I only have the budget to make, like, you know, 10 maps or 20 maps or whatever, right? So I told the writer, you have to write it that this army fight that thing or chase it around, or you have to reuse the content they have in the game. You can't just like constantly write it, or next planet, next, but no, it has to be the same planets for the most part. You only make like 5 planets, right? And this person was refused. They were like, no, but it hurts my vision of my storyline. I was like, yeah, but we only have the budget to make 5 planets, okay? You can't have 10 planets in the storyline. It can only be 5 planets. And they just refused. So the idea, I was like, that's the door, right? But secondly, they said, this person was very entitled, right? Also the issue when you're young, there was like 10 years younger than me, I'm the creative lead, and they're acting like, well, you could just fire me. I'm like, you are a writer. I can fire a writer and get a mid-writer like you are in a minute. You know what I mean? It's the absolute bottom. I can't fire the lead programmer because he actually is incredibly important for the actual game working. That's kind of what I mean. So it was kind of funny too, because this writer was all in my grill, right? When I was like telling them over and over again, this is your last chance, and they say, well, you can't fire me. Like, I will fire you immediately if you don't fix it. Okay, fine. Like I don't care. like, that's how it is. And that comes back to number 1 point again, right? Not only does no one wants to be a writer, because it's the absolute bottom thing, but it's like, you know, it's like a combination of 1 and 2 is also that, well, it's also the worst job. So no one cares, right? No one cares about you because it's so easy to fire you. But I really mean it. It's so easy to fire them, and that they kind of comes to number 2, 3 thing together, right? Because think about it, like they are so easy to replace. So like I said, right, it is so easy to replace them because anyone can write, you know, at a mid-level. But again, I can't rewrite the network expert, right? I can't rewrite the person that's the best artist, has the, you know, the visual vision for it, you know. I can't, you know, replace the designer that's doing all the math. I can't write the AI guy these days, you know. But I can make an AI write for me instead, yeah. It is the easiest job to replace. At the localizer, at least needs to know the language, right? They are very bad usually, but at least it needs to know the language of it. Until AI fixes that too, but at one point, at least they have to know Japanese or Brazilian or whatever, right, to do the language thing. But a writer, I genuinely keep writing myself from. And in that game, that's what happened basically. After I fired them, I just wrote all the game story and the lore myself, you know, like after work basically. I did overtime, I used it myself, like for free, honestly. The company, I was like, whatever, I just write it. like, that's, so I was like, Yasumi Matsuno, I was like, whatever, that's like my idol, I just write it myself, whatever, this is game vision, yeah. But I really do think that, right, that, as I pointed before, that brings me to point number 4. Writers are the last person on the game to care about the actual gameplay. Growing up, I had this fight all the time, you know. Gameplay versus graphics. That even kept going into the industry as well. People could tell me that, oh, graphics sells. No, gameplay sells in the end, right? A fun game has to be fun, so to speak, right? If a game is just beautiful, there's no substance, it's not gonna last. It might sell again, but it's gonna last, you know. However, these days, it's even worse. That's what I made in my last video. It's like, nowadays, it's even like storyline. People are arguing, no, it's a storyline, right? And that's kind of where the woke people fail, because they are too much like, oh no, it's supported if Zelda is black or white or whatever. No, Link is just he's an elf. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care. But the writers then are even worse than the artists, right? And it sounds weird, but I mean it, because I have a lot of issues with artists over the years. Being too focused on the graphics, you know, the gameplay shit with that. Yeah, and they sometimes I'm like, no, you have to make graphics that fits the gameplay, right? I'm not gonna like rearrange the game around your graphics, right? As I have to, but usually not, right? And right even worse than that, because they even more try to force you to like control your game mechanics or whatever. And I want to say it's a big caveat here. Of course, games like Fahrenheit, Heavy Rain, Talk of Ubi, so on. These like very, very narrative-driven, like visual games. Okay, fine. There the storyline drives the gameplay, kind of merged together, right? But it's like that one specific genre. But every other genre, the gameplay has to be the one that drives the storyline, and you write the storyline around the game, right? Obviously, it should be. But writers, again, are the worst on this thing, right? So I don't trust them. Yeah, I don't trust game writers, because they're always just trying to write, you know, what they want to write, right? Not to make the game be fun or whatever, right? This brings it to my fifth point, which is a combo with my four then, is that basically I trust everyone else in the industry rather than a writer if they are designer plus writer, artist plus writer, something like that, okay? When they have an actual practical skill in the industry, so they can code and they write, yeah, much better. But these people are gonna care so much more about writing into the game, you know? Like, especially code writer guys, they really know that, okay, this is how much hours it takes to code or whatever, right? This is blah blah blah, this is the hinge and so on. I have to make the storyline fit into the code, you know. They care almost probably too much about that. But game writers basically, they don't understand, you know, what to write, right? To actually fit into the budget, or they just don't care. Yeah, it's either one, but usually the other. And that's kind of my main point video, right? I said earlier, Yasumi Matsuno, so one of these great video games usually are never written by, again, writers, right? They're written by a guy like him, that's like a political designer guy, right? And then they write what is interesting around that. It means they understand how the game actually works, right? And they try again, as I said in my previous point, and try to make that thwarting happen, so it stays in the budget and so on, right? And that brings me to my sixth point, which is very important in general for the game industry, is that people that are good in the industry have two or more crafts. What I mean is they can do two practical skills, right? For example, you have a coder, they can also do art, right? Or VFX. Art, VFX combination, very common. Or like designer art, VFX, right? Those combos, very, very common. Designer programmer, as common, but they do exist, right? And so on. Producer, programmer, and so on, yeah. Those people are usually always better. So for example, I know a lot of coders that are better coders, and actually better than a design coder, right? Like they write faster and so on, they're better at coding. But they're pretty bad to work with because they can't focus. They just run their own stuff, right? And you have to constantly micromanage. No, don't do. We need that first. They spend so much time doing nothing that actually anyone cares about, right? Where the design code, they have a much more laser focus on what we need right now. They're much better. They're actually working on this is what's gonna make the most time for the player, the gamer, using the end, right? They're probably the most, let's look at it, design programmers, yeah. Design artists, right? Okay, they have an idea, this is gonna be a great boss fight, and then they can make the dragon themselves, you know what I mean, and show some concept art or whatever, right? So they're great to work with, they're very good at visualizing and explaining their ideas, they create things, and so on. They get my point. These people are usually so much better. People only have one craft, right? And then it comes back to the writing then, of course. Only having writing craft is the least important craft because no one cares about it when it actually comes to how the game works, yeah. And they're obviously the writer is the person that is the furthest away, right, from the actual gameplay. And again, if you don't have two crafts then, for example, if you're a designer writer, which again, I would say is the most common historically, right, in older games, like Final Fantasy and so on, right? Those people usually are designers, producers, writer, right? So they have the idea, they have the game concept, and so on, and then they also write the lore and the storyline. I mean, that makes sense, right? Because they understand what the game is gonna be, what's gonna be fun, and so on, and then they kind of write the twist around that, you know, this person will betray you later and so on. But yeah, it's just so weird, and I just never see it being successfully done. And lastly, that thing I have to point out, which is not really like my point, but you get how it works, is that writers aren't, how to say, they aren't employed by the companies, right? They are, they're hired as contracts, right? As consulting. It is very similar, actually, to, for example, if you see the Bayonetta voice acting kind of controversy 2 years ago, and so on, right? Where you kind of quickly learn that, oh, these voice actors, and I called her out her bluff here. She lied completely. I called her out in the middle, right? She that she was lying about the salary and so on. They only work, for like a few hours, right? So for example, I was a voice director on my last game, and that sounds badass. It isn't really, right? I was a voice, so I wrote all the voice lines, and then I directed the actors we had hired, right, to say, oh, she's got sassy and so on, right? Basically, and so on, and but it takes like a few weeks at most. Yeah, it's a very little work, right? So the voice actors we get for that game, they're hired, which are paid and so on, right? But they don't work that many hours. They work for like a few days, a week, maybe 2 weeks, right? And then it's over. And that obviously means that a voice actor, just like, not like a writer, but even less than a writer, I suppose, a voice actor has absolutely zero input, right, on the actual gameplay and so on, or design of them, because no one cares about them. I'm just being like kind of pragmatic here. No one cares, because you come in here for like 20 hours to do some voice lines and then you leave. You know what I mean? Like, it's not really that anyone cares. Of course, there are some games that are very, very story focused, right? But even the games that are very story focused, the voice that usually comes in the last, right? To use voice to line and the game is kind of finished, right? But especially on the more hardcore game focus, when you have very little voice lines and little storylines, of course the voices come in the last. And the writer is basically the same thing, right? The writer and the voice actors, they usually, they're hired the last, right? They're hired the last few months or whatever. And both of them, like I said, aren't really employed, right? They aren't actually a stable employee. Instead, they're hired for like a month. So in my case, for example, with the Serious and Dawn writer, that person is only gonna work for us for 4 months, right? We take them in when the game is almost finished, like half a year left of the game, right? We take them in so they can basically take some of my job, right? Because I have to write it otherwise, and just so I can do other stuff, I can be a manager or whatever, right? But then, of course, as I said, long story short, as they listen to me, right? They want to write their own stuff. I was like, no, you have to write it fits into my game, Basically, write the dialogue for scenes I already. Basically, this is the scene. Write the dialogue, And they're like, but I don't want them to be in prison. I don't care, okay? It's a prison, basically, right? This is already, the scene's already set, right? They also very fine pressure too, because they were so lost, right? They were so lost because they couldn't understand that. But most of these scenes are also already set in, in stone, okay? Like if I tell you these characters are gonna fight on an ice planet, and the writer's like, no, but I don't want that in my storyline. But I don't care because the ice planet is already made, okay? I already have the ice planet models, I have the graphics for that. So we're gonna have an ice planet fight. You know what I mean? Basically, right? Yeah, you have to write for the ice planet. I fired them after like 2 weeks, okay? Jesus Christ. You get some PTSD for this thing. But anyway, you get my point. The writer also comes in the last, right? And I think that's a very important thing to understand, I think, from a game writing standpoint, is that, again, you usually are used to consulting business. You come in when the game is basically finished, right? Which means that it's the reverse of writing a book. Right? You write a book, you write it from scratch. This is, I want to have a hero. She's badass with red hair and this thing, and she can turn into a dragon and something. But we are game writers, like, no, we can't have that, because the hero is a man and he turns into a wolf instead. So you have to write that. But no, they have to write that because we have a wolf model. That's how it works. So game writing is the far task, right, from the book writing, because you have like almost no say, right, what actually happens in most cases as a writer. And honestly, it is kind of similar, right, to, I think, again, why so many writers hate writing for, the Castlevania or whatever, right, this kind of established video game franchise, because the same thing there, you have to write with established characters to have an established look and these things and so on, right? And then it goes and triggers people, because these writers are, oh, but I want her to be black, but she's writing the game, you have to be black, and they force their own, they force their own agenda into it, right? But they have to actually, you should at least have to actually, stay in what is supposed to be the franchise, right? And they will try to insert. One of the Velma is a good example of that, because Velma is basically another TV show, right? And they couldn't get that to air, so they just like rewrote them as Scooby-Doo characters, right? Very clearly. It's supposed to be something else, right? But I think that's kind of the general idea of it, right? Because I think, yeah, they have so little power with the writers. Like, again, them and the voice actors has the least power. And the thing is that, very, very shortly here, I don't want to go into too much here, but like QA, okay. So I worked as a QA, right? Myself for a few years. Of course, people do QA, and I have QA guys now and working with them and so on. I talked a lot to the QA manager at my work and so on today a lot. And QA is interesting because QA is kind of in the, they have low salary and so on, right? But they actually have a lot of say, right? Because QA usually is like, like wishing to be developers or designers, usually not artists, either coding or design usually. They might have a degree, right? And they usually kind of get what is fun or not, gameplay wise, right? So they actually have a lot of input because you need QA all the time from day one to the end, and especially at the end, but even all the time. And you're always like, what do you think about this thing? Yeah, it works out. So yeah, QA is very different because they are obviously very low, right, at the employee like rate and salary and so on, like ranking positioning, just like writer. But instead they have a lot of input because they at least can input the gameplay, right? Is it good? Is it balanced? Is it fun? And if a QA is like, I think this case is really boring. I hate playing this character. It's so boring. It works, but it's really, really boring. You might be like, better change that, That being said, I love writing for games though. Every game I worked on, I want to write the storyline. But the thing is that I personally try to write it again, from like making it work. I take pride in like being this like budget guy. I take pride like, can I make it that this stage is 5 times? I take pride in like, how can I effective-wise this so I can reuse the same setting like several times, I'm too much of a capitalist producer in the dark end, right? No, but honestly, I love games like Ogre Battle, FFT, whatever, Unicorn Overlord. So I take great pride in designing, especially strategy games, and thinking of how can I reuse a stage. Maybe you attack a fortress, and then later in the game you defend the stands. We can use the same models, but maybe we add some turrets and some other stuff. I take great pride in that because I love those games. It's like my favorite genre. Strategy JRPGs like Unicorn Overlord. So I think a lot of love in that. Like, how can I make that work out? But I don't know, guys. But I just take great pride in this. I just love that, thinking about like, how can I reuse this map or whatever? How can I like see this thing coming from both sides and it's still fun and entertaining, right? If anything, I think that is like a natural thing in video games. Is that it is pretty fun to play like take over this massive fortress and then defend it against a Zerg swarm kind of thing. I think it just kind of works right for strategy games, and it is a great way to reuse. But honestly, yeah, flipping the map the other direction is like this most beautiful design thing ever. How can I make it happen, right? But like I said earlier in the video, I hope you like the video, guys. Because like I said earlier, right, that's the way my brain works. Right? As a kid, not only was I like, oh yeah, this guy, this guy's great. Ooh, yeah, a man, oh great, So I was into who is actually behind the games, right? But I always thought of that stuff too. It's like, how do I make a cool level design? How do I make an interesting stage, right? How and like, oh, they reuse that monster here or whatever, but it's interesting because it changes like that, so on. You know what I mean? Or they combine these two bosses now. That's a cool combination, so on. I love this stuff because you think about that. How can I make a game entertaining by, because for me the greatest like creative art, honestly, is to like have as little money as possible, right? But make, what I mean? Like, yeah, make the most possible of it. It's kind of like a chef making food, and you only have like the worst meat part. But how can I make a great dish out of like the cheapest food, right? That's kind of what I think about in the best case scenario, right? How can I make something happen with with the fewest developers, or whatever, right? Like I only have like 3 hours of coder, guys. How can I make it happen, right? So that kind of things, right? And so on. So I like to do. How can I reuse it? Like in my last game, it's always like, how can I reuse? Oh, I have this mechanic, and I want to have more mechanics, right? But that means I have the code for this mechanic. Separately, one game I worked on, we had that you could like you could remove someone's armor. You punch them and you could remove armor. Okay, and then I was like, well, if I take the code right for removing armor, and I knot it, I can reverse it. Can I then gain armor? That was an easy code to use right like this, and then I can punch them basically, opposite effect, but I can punch them and I gain armor instead. Now then I have a plus armor ability, right? Then I go to have some effect on it, but like there's also a way to be a good designer. You have to think like, how can I reuse the code and the map and all this stuff, right? And again, then I guess the writers are the least part, they are the furthest away from this. Yeah, there is like, I want to write a story. How do I reuse your material in all the stuff? I guess the last thing I would say is that one thing I also asked what to do in this case is I also need to have some scenes, I need to have some foreshadowing for the next DLC too. So I need some DLC too. You have some guy in the shadow over there. And the honestly, this is kind of funny. I remember having a discussion with this person and being like, well, okay, but can you at least have a person standing in a silhouette in the corner over there? And the person's like, no, that's cliche. I'm like, yeah, but that's supposed to be a hero later. I need to have a little bit of silhouettes, I need to have a little bit of Death by DLC. And they also did do that. I don't care, okay? I know it's silly, but I need to also promote the next game or the next DLC too, right? You need to have a little bit of like One Piece, Oh yes, this guy was mentioned, the Warlord. Yeah, I mentioned him 5 years ago. You need to have it too, okay? Honestly. And guys, hope the video subscribe, press the like button, and have a great day.